Okay, so I'm going live, even though it is a little bit early. I'm not sure everything's working, so it's kind of just hopefully like a test. And I'm going to sit here almost in silence as I watch the screen. But we might start early. I don't know if it really matters. Do you have to start exactly when you say you're going to start? I don't think that's true. I think if I sat here for 3 whole minutes not saying anything, it'd be rather annoying. So I am trying to get warmed up. And what I've done so far is very minimal. I have created a GitHub repository that will house everything that I'm doing. And I went ahead and just tried to get this live so that you could follow along with the code as I push changes and stuff. And I've created a tmux session that is really plain. There's it's all empty actually, and so there's nothing here. And I've created a conda environment, and I've gone ahead. If we hop in here, I'm using my conda Python, and I have gone ahead and installed Spacy and the small language. So I can say import Spacy, and then I can say spacy.load. I think this is right. Yeah, so we have our language, and we're actually loading it. And then we could create like a document is equal to NLP, and like say something like this Apple product is $49.95. And now we have a document. Now, it's been a long time since I've used Spacy, almost 2 years. And so we need to look at some docs real quick. So I have a document, and I want to find tokens. I think that's tokens or words. I should have probably done some of this before I just started streaming, but I did want this to be genuine. I mean, because you're really watching just a developer just build something. So we have a bunch of, I think I can say, is this a doc? Okay, it's a document. I got to learn Python as well. I haven't written Python. Okay, doc.ins. I haven't used Python in almost 2 years. Let's see. Okay, so it found 2 entities. It found Apple and the price. And if we look at the number 1, what is this type? This is not even where we're going to start, but I thought it was a good idea to go ahead and just familiarize myself with this a little bit. Oh, we can actually see we have label underscore will give us. So label underscore, and we can see that's money, and this one should be like an organization, and it is. So we have a working Spacy installation. So what I'm going to start with is actually building out the Rails app. And I think something to look at is I've created a data set. So inside of Ruby, we can say that our CSV is csv.read. This is at my desktop. Dataset.csv. And this is not a great data set. There's only 51 actual entries. I can't remember like the terminology around data set, but if we look at one of these, what I did, I really struggled. I started looking at camping, and you get into camping and you start going to Facebook groups, and what I noticed in Facebook groups is when they write a post, or when people write posts, they generally have this, like they'll create a post that I thought this is actually a really cool data set to extract like models. Like we have like an F-150, that's a pickup truck. F-250 is a pickup truck here in America. And so I thought, well, this would be interesting to try to grab. This is a Ford truck. And so like try to find like this is a Ford F-150. This is probably some type of camper that is a year of 1972. So I thought it would be fun to try to annotate these Facebook posts and see if we can't extract like some type of entity, like a year and a model and stuff like that. And I also went to Craigslist. I just went all over the place trying to find data like this. It was a lot harder than I was expecting it to be, but this is the data that we have, and it should be exciting. So what I'm going to do first is create a new Rails project, and we're going to call this our, oh my goodness, I don't know what to call this. It is like the main application. We'll just call it annotator. Is that how you spell annotator? And I'm going to configure this Rails app to not have test by default. And we're going to set up Webpacker with React because we're going to use React in this application. And I'm going to set my database to be PostgreSQL. Okay. So while this is running, this is going to create our Rails application, and it's going to install the React part of Webpacker, and that will give us, what would that give us? That gives us like a loader for Webpack to actually load our React application, and it'll set us up so that we can just basically run this out of the box. And I probably should have started that and run to the dataset in another tab, but this is real. This is what I would do in real life, and it is what I'm doing here. So we will wait for this. And it's actually really hard to stay interesting, trying to sit here and watch this and think, what can I say that's interesting? Like, look at all the warnings. Don't you see this as a problem node? Like, we can't sit there and create packages and have every single package to create a warning for some deprecated package that's like 20 levels deep. But we just have to live with it. It's the world we live in when we go to Node. And I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. Okay, so we're almost done. I guess we're not almost done. So now we've installed Webpacker with all the Webpack dependencies, and now it is going through and installing and configuring our Webpack configuration for React, and now that's done. So I can hop into Annotator here, and the first thing I want to do is remove the Git directory, and that is because we are tracking. This is going to be a mono repo, and so we're going to have our Annotator Rails application here. So I'm going to just say like we're going to add Rails app with React. Okay, so we have that started for us, and I'm going to hop into that annotator, and I'm going to run Rails DB migrate, or I guess first I'll create the database, and then we'll migrate it. And I just want to make sure this works. Cool. So we'll migrate this database, and this is all this is going to do is create an empty schema.rb file. So you can see we have this file, and if we look at it, it's empty. And I like to do this just so that I have like a starting point when I create a new project. This is the schema. It also gives me a chance to see, am I reusing a database? Because I've had that happen, and running this will actually create a schema based off of the existing schema. So here we can just say add initial schema. And I know for a fact that we're going to have some tools. So we're going to add a reach router. And I had this package. I looked last night, React annotation. There's a, let's see, React text annotate. There is this one, I think. I'll have to double check, but this looks right. This package does like all of the heavy lifting for us. So as you can see, we have a text annotator, and whenever we define, in this case, state is probably not part of this application. I actually don't know where that came from, but basically I think this demo is just trying to indicate you can use hooks, you can have a state and a set state, and we're saying that our tag is person, and that so whenever I make a selection here, it is going to tag that as person. And if I change this here, you can see this is actually our state. So we're changing the tag So when I select something like this, it's going to tag that as org. And you can see this data set is very simple. It is just an array of objects or hashes that contain the start and end of our selection and the tag that we gave it. And so we're going to model our database around this. And so this package was React Text Annotate. So I'm going to go ahead and add this. That way we'll have, I think, all the packages that we need for our application. And I'm just going to commit this and say add package, and we'll call it reach router and React Text Annotate. Okay, so that, I'm going to go ahead and push this. Oh, I need to start my SSH server. Whew, I almost tried to deploy with Capistrano. My typing is not very good this morning, even though it is almost afternoon. Okay, so we've got this live. The other thing we're going to do is hop into our gem file, and we're going to add the gem for GraphQL, and we'll install that gem, which maybe it's a new version, but okay, so we install that. When you add this gem GraphQL, it adds a Rails generator. So if you run Rails G without any arguments, it's going to give you basically like all of the tasks that are available. And we care about this GraphQL install. And so we'll say Rails generate GraphQL install. And this is going to do a lot. Basically, it's scaffolding out a bunch of different or default GraphQL types. And it's also registering a GraphQL controller that we can take a quick look at here. This has a single action on it called execute, and it takes in the query and it runs it against our GraphQL schema. And the other thing it did is it added this gem, which I'm going to push up to here so that all of my development gems live in this group. And we need to bundle install again. And now what I'm going to do is commit my gem files, my gem and gem file lock, and I'm going to say add gem GraphQL and graphical Rails. Okay, and this I think gives us everything that we need. So I'm going to go ahead and commit this and say install GraphQL. And now, with all of our Ruby libraries installed and our database, we're going to come over here and start our server. And, oh, I need to go over here. And I'm also going to start my Webpack dev server. And so with this, we should be able to hop over here and go into localhost 3000. And it says we're on Rails, so all good here. And what I'm going to do, if it's not clear already, I'm going to start this entire session by creating out our Rails application, storing this data, and then we're going to hop back into Spacy to actually write something that can train models based on our data set. And so because we're starting with Rails, let's go ahead and hop into our routes. And what I want to do is I want to have a route that, regardless of whatever path I go to, always loads my React application, because we're going to have this as a SPA or a single page app. And so I'm going to first start with and say that the root goes to my application, and I'm going to have a SPA action on this. And then I also want to say that I want to have a get that goes to any path, and I want this to also go to application SPA. And so what's going to happen here is if I refresh now, we get no SPA action, which is fine. So we can hop into our application controller and define a SPA action. And I'm just going to start with render, I think I said HTML, like testing. And this should just give us back testing. And I can go to any path I want. And Rails is always going to redirect this to our SPA action. And so to make this work I'm also going to have to create a view for this, and that's just going to live at application. I can't type application spa.html.erb, and we're just going to make this file. Okay, so if I refresh, you can see we don't get anything, and it's because it is loading this view. And if we refresh, we get that. So this is all good. The other thing that I want to do now that we're actually loading our entire application, if we hop into our application layout, so being a Rails app, we have a layout that defines the overall structure of this page. And you can see we have this JavaScript pack tag for application. And what I'm going to do, I guess I should have done this. I'm going to hop into that spa and just add a div of the ID of app. And then, I know I'm doing like a bunch of like little things without actually seeing any results, but we're close. I'm going to hop into that JavaScript application pack. And so this file, if we clean it up so it's a little bit easier to see, this file is, like, if you can tell when I write this file, my browser is reloading. And what I can do is I'm going to add a document event listener. And this is going to be for DOM content loaded. Oh, there we go. One of these days, I will be able to type anytime I want to, but that is not where we are today. But I should be able to grab, look at that, even after I comment on my lack of ability, query selector. It's getting worse. The more I comment, so we're just going to focus, Baylor, and just type. If I should be able to set its inner text to something like, wow, this worked. And you can see that when I write this file, our JavaScript Webpack is refreshing the page in real time. And so we're really close to now being able to start adding React. So I'm going to go in to my app JavaScript. And something that's cool about the way Webpacker works is that it is loading, like you see we require channels here. That file actually comes from this channels directory, and there's an index.js. What that means to us is that we can load from this directory without having to specify like a relative path. And so we're going to utilize that by making a new file, app JavaScript. I'm going to call this like, I guess I'll call it annotator, although I'm hesitant because I don't want to have to spell this every time, especially since I can't remember how I spelled it initially. So many good things going on so far. So we're going to hop into, oh, I'm getting an error from YouTube. Not enough data. Okay, well, I'm just going to keep rolling, and hopefully this is working. So this is going to go back into that app JavaScript annotator. I'm going to call it index.js. And I'm going to make this directory. And I'm going to import React from React on this. I'm also going to import React DOM from React DOM. And we're going to grab this same event listener. And inside of here, we're going to say React DOM. We're going to render. And here I'm going to render an app component that we'll create in a second. And this is going to go into that document.query selector for our app. So I should be able to remove all of this and just say require our annotator, which for me, I feel better about making it a relative path here. Just because, I don't know, the way I feel about like this channels, I feel like could be a node package. It just feels odd from the pack level. I have like these little mini rules in my head that are not always consistent, but it just makes me feel better to see it relative in this location. So let's go ahead and add our app component, and we're going to just call, I guess what we'll do to get started is just add our router, and we'll have to import that. And this comes from our reach router. Okay, and I'm going to have, I guess, to get started, a home component And we're just going to put a div in here and call it home. And then I'm going to add an about component. And this is going to have a div that just says about. And this is just to prove, like for myself, that all of our routing is working. So I have home as the path of /, and we're going to have about at the path of about. And so when we load this now, we don't get anything. So if we go back to our root path, we get home. And if we go to /about, we get our about. And we should also be able to add a link inside of here. So we'll change this to be like, I don't know, link to, and we're going to make it / back to home. So much typing. Okay, so we have this back to home. I click on it, it redirects back to the home route without actually refreshing the page. So we have a working React router here, and for my own sanity, we're going to remove this and start fresh. So I think what I'm also going to do is just continue growing this. Let's add Bulma. And this is a CSS framework that I'm beginning to like, almost more than Bootstrap. So I need to import Bulma CSS bulma.css. And that's going to style our page with Bulma. And what I want to do is, man, I'm just redoing everything at this point. But I'm going to create a React fragment. And I'm going to put in our navbar across the top. So let's create that, and that's going to live at app JavaScript annotator. I'm going to create a directory called components, navbar, and then make this index.js. And we need to create that path. And here we can keep going. So we're going to import React from React. And we're going to have a navbar component. And we'll just export default navbar. And here, this is going to be a nav. And this is all just part of Bulma. And thankfully enough, I remember it well enough to just keep going. But we have a brand part of navbar. And this is going to have a link to our home page that we'll just call like our annotator. And we're going to import link from our reach router. And just to keep this where I can actually see these changes happen live, I'm also going to import navbar from components navbar. Okay, so we can see this is starting to show up, starting to work. I need to add a class to this of navbar item. And okay, so this is starting to look correct. And what I'm also going to do is just add some space to this on the top and bottom, just so it's not sitting flush against the browser. And I'm also going to just, well, I guess I'll put it inside of here. Well, let's create a container class. And this is going to offset it so that we're actually kind of contained in this page. And for that, what I may also do is just move it here. I hope this format of me just building as I kind of go, because I didn't prepare for this. I am just doing this. I thought of the idea last night. Well, I thought of it a long time ago, but I decided to stream it last night. And so I'm just going with the flow, and I'm hoping this is enjoyable to watch. So for our navbar, I'm also going to need some links. And so I'll have a navbar start. And inside of here, we're going to have just a couple of links. And this will have the class name of navbar item. And we'll make this link, and we'll just say back to home. And let's create a view for our data sets. Okay, so what we'll have is we can go to home, which really will not contain very much, but we'll have our datasets link. This will allow us to view the available datasets that we can train on, which initially is just going to be the one that I showed you at the beginning of the stream. And yeah, let's go ahead and commit this because we have a lot going. I think I did that wrong. Package and yarn, and I'm going to say add package Bulma. And this is a big change. We'll just say add initial spa structure. Okay, so we're getting close to having our application where we can really get going. There's just so much scaffolding to do, to the point like I'm beginning to think like when I create this data sets, it would almost be more interesting to have a working GraphQL database, so we're not like writing everything twice. And I kind of got sidetracked, and we haven't even created our schema yet. So let's do that. So many like redos, but we're live. We're live, and I have to just be happy with how I'm doing this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a model called Dataset, and this is for now only going to have a title, and I think that's okay. And if we look at that create datasets migration, I'm going to tell the title that its null is false. And I'm going to go into that data set and just say that it validates title, and that title must be present. So we can create this data set model. Cool. And I'm going to just commit this and say create data sets. And I'm going to go ahead and create a data set in the console. And the reason for this is that the CRUD of creating data sets and all of that is not relevant, I don't think, to what we're building. For us, we care more about building the text annotation tool and training a model with Spacy. So I'm just going to create a data set, and the title will be, oh, what am I going to call this? Like Facebook and Craigslist post. Or like auto make model extraction, or NER. How about that? Okay, so we have this huge, huge title, but it's very complete in terms of what it is. And the next thing I want to do is I want to actually create a text, like one of the sample or one of the data points in our data set. So I'm going to generate a model called text. Maybe not the best name, but it'll do. And actually, I'm going to call it dataset text, just so I feel better about not having a weird name floating around. And this is going to have a data set that it belongs to. And we're also just going to have the text that we're training on. And I think this is good for now. So this will get us our text. So let's look at that. Our dataset text. We're creating an association to dataset. It's a foreign key and it can't be null. I'm also going to set our text to be null false. And then on our text, it belongs to dataset, good. And it's going to validate the text to have a presence of true. And now we can go into our dataset. And I'm going to say that this has many text. And the class name for this is dataset text. And I do this where I don't have to say like dataset.dataset text. Instead, I can say dataset.text. I just think that reads better. It's just a personal preference. And to make these consistent, I'm going to put the validations at the top, associations at the bottom. So let's migrate our database again. This is going to create our text. And cool, we have that. So let's commit this and say add database text. And the last thing I want to do is we're going to find that data set, which is dataset.first. And I'm also going to require CSV, and I'm going to create my CSV in memory and say I'm going to read from my users fail array desktop dataset.csv. Okay. And I've kind of showed this before. I have like 50 entries in this data set, and I know that's not the right word, but my the vernacular of machine learning has escaped me. So in this data set, I have these 50 rows. They're free form text that I pulled from random Facebook groups that I was just trying to hunt around and look for topics that included make and model, and also Craigslist. And the interesting thing here is Craigslist has this I just went to the cars and trucks and also for the trade on Craigslist, like the barter section. Almost every single post starts with I have a, or a, like this. Like it was very interesting, and it made it hard because I wanted to find something that the model wouldn't learn. Like, oh, my product or this vehicle or whatever is just coming after I have a, right? Like, so this is kind of going to be an interesting problem. But anyways, we have this CSV, and we can look at these and that map. I want to just get an idea on length on here. They're all one, so I know that I have a multi-dimensional array that is only like something one. I don't know how to reference that or like label it, but anyways, this is going to be pretty simple because what we're going to do is say data set, or I guess we'll do this. We'll say CSV dot each, which is a thing, okay, and we're going to have a row, and we're going to say dataset dot text dot build, and the text will be row 0. And now, if we look at our text, we see we have all of these text in memory, and I should be able to say dataset.save, and immediately you see that it's gone through and inserted all these rows into our text tables, or table singular. And so if I hop into like Postgres for this annotator development here, and we select count star from dataset text, you can see we have our 51 rows. So this is all working, and it's actually kind of a cool point because now we're ready to actually add this to our graphical, like build a GraphQL model or query type for this. So I'm going to change this out to be localhost graphical, and this is something that we have to do. And so we'll hop over to that manifest.json or manifest.js, and I'm going to add this like so, and I'm also going to add the JS version of this. And now I need to restart my server. But this is because we're using Webpacker. I think it's because we're using Webpacker and the graphical gem is using sprockets. Maybe totally wrong there, but I think that's what happens. And so I'm going to commit this and just say load graphical CSS and JavaScript assets. How about that? Nice and complete message. And what we're going to do is hop into our query type, and we're going to remove some of this placeholder stuff. And we're going to have a field that is our data sets. It's going to return a types of data set type. It is not going to be null. And we're going to define data sets as dataset.order by created at descending. Okay? And so now if we go and create that, so app graphical types dataset type.rb, and this goes into the types module or namespace, is that class of dataset type. It's going to inherit from base object. And we're going to have that field of ID, which is integer, and it is all not null. And we're going to have our title, which is string, and it is also not null. Okay, so we can go ahead and start looking at this. So we have our data sets, and I have an ID and a title. Okay, so we have this data set, very cool. And I also want to have the text on here. So I'm going to say this has text, and this is going to be an array type of data set, and we're going to make this text type. It is not going to be null. And we're going to hop into app graphical types data set text type.rb. We're going to go back into that module, and we're going to have our data set text type. And this is going to have an ID field and a text field, which is not null. And so now if we refresh and we try to query our text and we grab ID and text, you can see that we're actually able to load our entire data sets with all of the text on them. So we're getting really close to building a data structure, because what I want to also be able to do is hop into here, and I'm just going to copy this because it's very similar. I'm going to remove this plurality and make this a single data set type that takes an argument of ID, which is an integer, and it is required. And we'll take that ID as a keyword argument. This is how this all works in GraphQL. So I'm going to say data.find or dataset.find by ID. So if we actually do this now, and we'll have an ID, which is a required integer, and we look for a data set by ID is equal to that ID variable, we can fetch the ID and the title, and we'll grab the text, and this will be just ID and text. And then in my variables here, I'm going to have that ID is set to 1, and you can see right away we've built an individual resource, if you will, on our GraphQL schema. So I'm going to say like add initial or add data set and text query types. Cool. So we'll push that. And I think what we also need is a way to fetch like a random, no, you know what? I'm going to change that back. I don't want it to be random. This is what we want to do. Okay, let's start by actually making this work. So we have this query and we want our data sets, and we just need ID and title. Okay, so this query will work to give us our data. And what I also just realized is that I never added Apollo. So we're going to say yarn add. I think we add Apollo Boost, GraphQL, and Apollo React hooks. Okie dokie. So this will get us all of our packages that will allow us to connect React to our Apollo API. Cool. So I'm just going to commit this and say like add package Apollo React. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to name this like Apollo React and friends, because if I try to comment separate it like I normally do, it will be too long for the commit message. So that is my way around that. And what I'm going to do is come over. We're going to go to this data sets. So I am going to. We need to configure Apollo. And so we'll hop over to our annotator index.js, and I'm going to import Apollo client from Apollo Boost. My memory is like racing because we're live and I have to do it right. So import, I think, Apollo provider from Apollo React hooks, and we can define our client, which is our Apollo client. There's new Apollo client. If I can type. And then inside of here, we're going to register that Apollo provider and say client equals client. And what this is doing is, I don't know if it uses React context. I assume it does. I think at one point it used Redux, might still use that. Doesn't really matter. Ultimately, what's happening here is that we are creating an isolated environment inside of our React application where only the children components will have access to this Apollo client. It's actually a very cool thing in that you could define an application that had multiple Apollo providers, and they each went different places. But in this case, we are very fortunate that we only have one, and we just need it inside of here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add our router, and I'm going to say that we have a datasets, and this path will be at datasets. And I'm going to kind of cheat and go ahead on this. I'm making this where it has this any nested routes, because I'm going to make this datasets like an actual module that's going to get, if you will, mounted at this path. So to do all of that, I'm going to go into app JavaScript annotator. I like to have my routes, like my modules, my pages, at a views directory. I'm going to call this datasets, and it's going to have an index.js. And we need to make that directory. And here I'm going to import React from React. I'm going to import router from reach router. We're going to have this datasets component, and this is going to have a router. Nothing like is going on here that's like super special. And I'm going to export default this datasets, and then I'm going to import it here. So import datasets from views datasets. Okay, so you can't really tell what's going on here, but what I'm going to do is have I can actually close this. At this point, we're completely done with our annotator main app. So Junior is asking, what am I seeing? I don't know if that's a compliment or a like, am I just like doing something just that doesn't make any sense at all? Probably the latter, but I hope everything is good. So what we're doing, I guess, just because you might be new to this, hopefully I'm doing things that don't just baffle everyone completely because I've lost my mind. I am building out a, I never even said this. I'm recreating Prodigy from Explosion AI. I don't know if I've even mentioned this before, and this would have been like something great to open with. Prodigy has this tool, very similar to this, where you can take text and you can annotate it, and you use that to train a model with Spacy. And so we're recreating this tool with using Rails and Python with this React text annotate package. This package gives us a very similar interface as this. If it's not the same one, I don't know. Never actually used Prodigy. I've only seen it. Where we can choose what kind of entity, and we can actually train it by making a selection. And so yeah, this is what we're building, and we're in the process. So far, we've added our database with our GraphQL interface, and then we are now at the point where we're adding this interface to start building out this tool. So we're in this datasets module, and the point of this will be to have like a list of all these datasets that come from our GraphQL query. And so I'm going to create a JavaScript annotator views, and we're going to go in that datasets module, and I'm going to name this list and make an index.js inside of here. And I'm going to import React from React. And we're also going to import GraphQL tag from, I think, Apollo Boost. And we're going to import our use query from Apollo React hooks. Like I said, I'm doing this from memory. Bear with me if this is like completely wrong and you know it. Just let me know in the comments, and I will hopefully see that. I need to keep my peripheral vision turned on. But what we're going to do is we're going to have this query. So we're going to say like all data sets is equal to this GraphQL tag. And this will allow us to, what happens here is when this gets compiled, Apollo is actually, or in this GraphQL here, are actually going to turn this into an abstract syntax tree, an AST. And so it allows us from our, ergonomically, we write GraphQL in the syntax that we expect and we know and we love, but ultimately underneath, this is getting turned into something very efficient, into a JavaScript object that can be diffed and parsed and everything like that. So this is our GraphQL query to load our data sets. I'm going to have a constant for our list, and this will just start out. It's pretty simple. We're going to return back a fragment, and we're going to have an h2 class name of title. And we're going to say all datasets. And this should start working. Close, close. We've created this list. We need to import that here. So import list from list at a relative path. And at this router, I'm just going to say that my list is mounted at path at the root. And so what we'll see now is a big fat error, and I don't know why. Link is not defined. So list. Okay, boom, there we go. So what's interesting about this is if we go and create another annotate index.js, what we have here is we have at our very top of our application, we have this router, and it says, hey, if I'm at path datasets or children, I want to load this datasets component. And this datasets component is saying, hey, I'm a router. Whenever I'm at the root, I want to load list. If I'm at something like ID, then I'm going to load my text or something like this. This is going to be like nested resources. It might be like detail. I usually name it show, but that's just because I come from Rails and I like to keep it kind of the naming conventions consistent. And we haven't done this yet, so I'm going to take this away, but we're going to move in that direction where when we define the show route, we're working at a relative path to wherever this datasets is mounted. And so it allows us to reuse this, allows us to put it in different places and still work with router and having like relative paths to sibling components. So we need to take that away. We're going to have this list. So what we want to do now is actually list out these data sets, which right now we only have one. And so what I'm going to do for that is create a function. This is just my way of working. I like to create a function that follows the React hooks syntax. I'm going to call this use datasets, and it's going to be a very simple wrapper around this use query. And so we'll have our loading, error, and data that come from use query with all data sets. And what I'm going to do is normalize this a little bit. So this is going to return the loading and error. So whatever Apollo gives us, we're going to pass that through. But we're going to change this to be data sets. And we're going to say if we're loading or error, then we're going to return an empty array. Otherwise, we're going to return data.datasets. And datasets here, this is not magical. What's happening here is if we look at this query, this could be replaced with data if we were thinking of this as a JavaScript object. And so we're saying data.datasets, and datasets returns an array. So when we use this, we can now use our loading and data sets equal to use data sets. And I'm just going to put in a quick, like if I'm loading, then I'm going to put out a div that says like loading. And if I'm not loading, then let's just put out like datasets.length just so we can see that this is working. And it's working beautifully because we got a 0. So maybe we have an error. So for that, I'm going to say if, let me put this over here, if error, then console.log error. And we just need to know, and it seems like we are, JSON.parse. Oh, I can tell you what it is right now. So this actually worked out really good because I forgot. When we make this post request, Rails is trying to authenticate that this is not like a cross-site attack. And the easiest way to fix this, though maybe not the best, but I think it's perfectly fine in this area, we're going to go to that GraphQL controller, and we're going to say we want to skip before action, and it's verify authenticity token. And so this before action comes from that protect from forgery, which is just, I don't even think application controller Like there used to be a protect from forgery here. I think this is just migrated into action controller base. But now what happens is we refresh, we get 1. So this is semi-dangerous, but for an API, it's kind of expected. And so, and maybe we could do this one, protect from forgery with null session. I don't know. I just know this works, so we're going to do that. And in fact, I'm going to commit that and say like allow a Ajax request, something like that. And so we have this error. I'm going to take it away because I don't expect us to have many more. And if we do, that's really a bigger problem than just this. So what I'm going to do now is we have this data sets. I'm going to map over these. And actually what we'll do, let's just do this. Let's create a component that is like like items. And the items will be the data sets. And I'm just going to put this here, const items. It takes in that items array. And this is going to be, let's just do a table. You know, I've never done a table with Bulma, so I don't know the CSS, but I'm hoping it's semi-normal and that normal syntax works. So we're going to call our title, and we're going to have like actions in another column. So we're just scaffolding out a basic table structure, and we're going to go into the items.map. This gives us a data set, and I probably should have named it differently, but that'll be fine. And we will close that out, and we're just going to put in a table row. The key will be that data set ID. And this just tells React like how to uniquely identify this so that if it sees a change, it doesn't have to re-render absolutely everything. And that might not be a very good explanation of that, but it's what I know, or how I understand it at least. And let's do something like where we grab our link component from reach router, and I'm going to put in a link to, and this is just going to be the dataset.id, and we're going to call this like view, and I'll put in a right arrow just to really almost make this look like a real application. And we got an error, so we need to find the error. Items.map is not a function. So if we're not loading, we pass in this items. Oh, maps singular. And still an error. String not substring not a function. I'm thinking that this is a reach router thing, and I need to make this to string. And it is. Okay, so we now have this table. It's listing out our data sets, and it gives us this link. And you'll notice that this ID that we're passing directly into link is actually going to /ID. And so we're able to, just like I was kind of mentioning earlier, with reach router, we're able to use relative paths to allow them to drive our entire routing structure. We don't have to, like this component doesn't need to know how do I get there. I can just kind of follow REST protocol with resource/ID. And so this is working, and we'll just tag this or commit it as, well, I guess we'll say configure Apollo and add datasets view. Very good. And I'll go ahead and push that, so this is all going up live as we are working on it. And what we're going to do now is go into this annotator, or app JavaScript's annotator, use datasets show index.js, and we're going to import React for this. And we're going to have our show, and this is going to take in an ID, and that ID comes from this URL parameter. And this is going to be something. Right now we're just going to return back a React fragment, and we're going to have our import link, and we're going to put in a link to go back up one directory in our URL, and we're going to put a left arrow and say all datasets. This is kind of how I've come to doing, this is how I like to do my actual routes, like my breadcrumbs, just to have a single route that goes back up. So to make this work, we're going to export default our show. And then down here, we're done with our list component. So I'm going to hop back up to datasets index, and I'm going to import show from show. And this is this component here. And I'm going to add it to say show has the path of ID. And so now this is working even though it's not entirely clear, but we actually have this ID available to us here. And so you can see that listed out there, and we can change this to be whatever. And this ID is being passed from the URL, oops, didn't mean to do that, from the URL into our component. And so now what I want to do is actually write this other query, which did look like this. And so this query that we've created allows us to take in an ID as a variable. We'll load that individual data set, and then we load all of our text, our actual items inside of that data set. So I'm going to copy that query, and we're done with this datasets module again. And we're going to import our GraphQL and import our use query. And we're going to have that dataset query and GQL, and we're going to paste this in. And I'm going to do the same thing I did before. I'm going to have this use dataset takes in ID, and we're going to have the same structure as before, where we just have loading, error, and data. This is use query, and we're going to use that dataset query, but we're going to change it this time to have some options. And the only option we have right now is our variables, and we're going to make it pass in ID. And we might need to say ID.to like parse int. And that's because ID is going to come in as a string, being from the URL string. And so this will allow us to actually pass this in as the integer that GraphQL is expecting. And then we're going to return the same thing. We're going to proxy in loading and error. And then we're going to have that data set. And this is going to be equal, like if we're loading or error, then it's a null object. Otherwise, it's data.dataset. Poorly named. I don't like having to say data.dataset, but it's just what it is, I guess. So we're going to have our loading state and our data set equal to use data set with that ID. And now what we can do is say, like, if we're loading, then we'll show that div loading. And if we're not loading, then we're going to render out more this time. So I have our h2 tag with the title or class name of text. Ooh, our h2 title here, and this is going to have the dataset.title. And we need to go back over so we can see this actually starting to work. And the other thing we want to do is list out our text. So we're going to make a component called text. And this is going to take in just an array of text. And I'm going to make it another table, which for this, I'm going to go to list index. And I'm just going to copy all of this so I don't have to do this twice. And we take these text. This will be like a summary. So we have this text. This is a singular text. Has an ID on it, and this summary is, we'll call this like text.text. That's poorly named as well. And I'm going to substring this and grab 0 to like maybe 50 characters. And this will be text.id. And we're going to call this annotate. And then finally, we can come down here, and this needs to be in a fragment as well. We can reference that text and say we have text is equal to dataset.text. Lots going on here, but we're really close. Oh, and you know what I'm also going to do is I'm going to truncate this by adding that. Okay, so this what is this doing now? So I feel like that was a lot of code to just kind of throw out there. But what we've got is we have this text array coming in from our query. We're able to pass all that through by passing this in as a data set. And then if we're loading, we just return this div. But if we're not loading, then we pass in an h2 tag with the title. We take that same kind of table component that takes in all the items, and we're rendering out these text items. That's an array. So we're just iterating over each of these, and then we're taking the first 50 characters, and that allows us to have this kind of where we get a gist of what this is, but we don't actually know what it is, if you will. Like, we don't get to see the annotations and all that. Now, what this also leads me to think is that, well, first let's just say like add a data set show view, something like that. Okay. The other thing is that I'm thinking we need to have like is annotated, is not annotated status on this, so that we would know which ones to do next, because we might pick one of these at random and we won't actually know, you know what I'm saying? Like, we won't know if we've already annotated or not. That will be a to do. In fact, we'll just do that here. Does this work? Does this give me like an alert? I don't know. We won't worry about that. We're just going to add in like this strong text and say like add annotation state, and I'll know what that means. It's not actually the most readable thing, but it'll work. And this, what I'm thinking, this annotate probably needs to go to I don't know if I want to make it like annotate one like that. I think this route feels odd. Instead, what I'll do is where we have our link, I'm going to make to the root like that, and now we don't need this. Can we do that? Okay, so now we have, well, that's actually wrong. I need this to be annotate. Okay, so we have this where we can now click on this and it takes us to annotate, and it takes us to the actual where this will live, because we're really close. I mean, like, we're super close. Although, you know, I say that if I do it this way, we'll have to work backwards to get the data set. Okay, that'll be fine. This will be, what I'm thinking is, like, I'll click on annotate. I probably want to have a link that lets me go back to this actual data set, but we'll make this all work. This is just going to be perfectly fine. So what I'm going to do is commit this. No, I'm not going to commit that. I'll commit it all in one go. So what we're going to do is create our app JavaScript annotator, index.js. We're going to have a new import annotate from views annotate, and I'm going to make that mount at annotate, and this will be annotate /star. Okay, and I'm going to alphabetize this because it just feels better. And we're going to go to app JavaScript, annotator views, annotate index.js. And we're going to make this directory. And we're going to import React from React. And we're going to type a little bit at a time until we get that corrected. And then we're going to say that we're going to have our annotate component. And this is going to take in an ID, and inside of here what we're going to do is, actually this will be a actual explicit return function, and I'm just going to make it be a fragment for now that puts out the ID from the URL, and we'll export default annotate. Can't type, but we're close. Okay. And so what we're going to do here now is we click on this, we should see that ID, and we don't. Perfect. That makes me feel good. I actually don't even know what this rendered. So annotator index. We have annotate. Oh, you know what? This is expecting to be a router. I'm going to change this to be an ID. It's probably inconsistent, which it obviously is very inconsistent, but everything is good because this annotator component will not have as much going on as the data sets itself, I don't think. And if it does, we just change it. So this is our annotator component, and what we need to do now is we need to be able to load a text directly. So we need to hop back over to our text type, and actually our query type first, and we're going to have a new field for text. This will return back a single dataset text type, and this will not be null, and it's going to have an argument of ID just like before, and we're going to define that text taking in an ID, and we're just going to say dataset text.find ID. And so with this, what I should be able to do is very similarly, just refresh, we'll change this to text, and because we're on a text now, we have this, and as you can see that when I pass in 1 or let's say 25, that we're actually getting back this individual text. And what I want to do is on this text type, I want to add a data set so we can go back up to its original parent, and this will be a data set type, and it is not null. So now with this query, we can actually go back to our data set and fetch the ID and the title. Okay, so as you can see, we can start, if you will, at the bottom where we have our text and go back up to where we have our data set. And so we're going to be able to use all of that on this component, which for now I'm going to commit my app GraphQL, and I'm going to tell this that I want to have add text, allow fetching tree from bottom. Not the greatest, but it will do. It'll suffice. So we're going to import our GraphQL again that we need for Apollo, and I'm going to define that text query, which we'll just call text, and GQL, and I'm going to put this in here. And finally, we're going to have our function for use text by ID, and we're going to have our loading, our error, and our data equal to use query for that text. All this is very similar to what we just did when we loaded individual data set. We're going to have those variables, and I'm actually just going to do it exactly like we had it before. What's happening here is that we get this ID from our URL, and it is a string, and so we're passing it as a variable by converting it over to an integer. And then what we can do inside of here is we're going to say that we have our loading error. I guess we don't need that, and I'm skipping steps here. It's okay. I'll go back and fill it in. Use text for this ID, and to make this actually return something, we're going to proxy that loading and the error again, and then we're going to have text equal to loading or error, which actually for this, I want this to be different. Oh man, I want this to be text and dataset as siblings. So we'll do that by saying that we have loading or an error, then we return back null, else we return back data.text, and we're going to have dataset, and it's going to be very similar to this, but it's going to be data.text.dataset. And so now I can actually reference my dataset directly. I kind of like that a little bit better. So what we'll do inside of here is just have our, or now what we'll do is say if we're loading, then we're just going to return back a div that says loading. But if we're loaded, then we're going to return back our link back to our data set, which I need to import link now. Import link. Okay, Okay, and this is going to change because we're actually at the point where we need to say datasets, dataset.id, and I'm going to change this to our left arrow, and this will be the dataset.title. Okay, so what this looks like now is if I go all the way through this, we have a data set, we go and view this, we get our all data sets breadcrumb, and we have this title, and if we click on one of these texts that we want to annotate, we get that title as a breadcrumb now, so we can navigate all the way through this independent of like nested resources. So everything is kind of coming together a little bit, and we're going to add our title to this page, which we'll just call like annotate text number, and not the greatest in the world, but it'll suffice because right now we're only labeling these texts by this kind of this ID here. So that's great. And now we get to the really, really fun part, which is we're going to introduce this React text annotator that we've been just kind of going past this entire time. And so I think we're going to use this one. And so we are going to actually, you know what, we'll just do it right here, I think. We're going to go in here and say import token annotator. Actually, you know what? We want text annotator. Let's look at this real quick, the two of them. We have token is using an array of words. So in this case, we're splitting on space, which we're going to do anyways, but that's okay. And this one, text, is actually using the text as is. So here's the difference. If I use this one, I think what's going to happen is if I select the middle of Monday, I get the whole word. On this other one, if I select the middle of Monday, I get just that selection. For us, I think this, oh, thank you, Murillo. If I can type over here, okay. So this, I would like to do this one for me because this one, as we can see, just following the naive split on space will grab the colon or the comma here. And I don't want that. I want to actually be able to say, you know, I want album here, not including that. So this is how we're going to do it. We're going to use text annotator. So we'll import text annotator from React text annotator. And I have no idea how this all works. It looks like we just take our text annotator, content, value is starting out as an array. So we're going to actually have some state on this. And I'm going to start out with value, and set value is equal to use state as an empty array. And actually I'm going to change this state and set state. And this is going to be an object that has value as empty array and tag as empty string. Not perfect because I'm realizing now we haven't even defined our tag types, but it's all good. We're working through this a little bit at a time until we actually make a working product. So we're going to have this text annotator, and I'm just kind of copying over what I see. So I see content is equal to text.text. I see value is equal to state.value, and I see onChange is taking in that value, and we say set state, and I want to merge my state with this value. Okay. Get span takes a tag and the color. Let's just see if we can get started with this, or if this errors because we don't have that get span. First of all, we can't find text annotator. So React text annotate, my mistake. Annotate. Okay, so we go back. And now we probably have split with offsets. And I don't know what that is. It comes from this file. And That comes from split with offsets text. That came from here, and that passed in content. Okay, that was my actual content. So what did it look like here? They passed in state.val or text, which is a constant that's probably just this whole string. And I passed in text.text, which is this. Okay. Let's include this get span. Although I think because of the fact that they're merging one, that it shouldn't matter. So, oh, I said context. My goodness. And we are, okay, we've got text. And if I make a selection, okay, it's actually highlighting this. So we have a kind of a working model here. We just don't actually have any types. Oh, okay, so that is tag. Oh, tag is empty string. Okay, so we want to have, oh man, thank you, Bernard. That means a lot. Thank you. So we need to have a drop down very similar to this example that allows us to choose our type. And we're going to have, you know what? I'm gonna commit this and say add minimal. Okay, I'm not the guy when it comes to spelling. That is like not my thing, but I do appreciate that. That means a lot. So we are going to have a add minimal annotator. Okay, and now what I want to do is I'm going to add my what am I trying to say? I want to add my types of entities, like entity types. So what I'm going to do is generate a model, and this is going to go to dataset entity type, or we'll call it entity. It's going to belong to a dataset. And if I can change this, okay, let me do that again. Rails generate model dataset entity is going to have a dataset that it belongs to. And we're going to have a title, which is a string, and we're going to have, do we want to have a color? I think we do. So we're going to generate this. Okay. And I'm going to go into that create dataset entity, and I'm going to make sure these are not null and migrate the database. So that's going to create that table, and then I'm going to hop over into our dataset. I'm going to say this has many entities, and the class name for this is dataset entity. And I'm going to hop over to that dataset entity, and I'm going to say this validates the title for presence, and it also validates the color for presence. So both of these are non-nullable fields. And so now what we should be able to do is let's add our DB and app models. Okay, so we're going to say we're going to create dataset entities. And I'm going to go into that data set. Oops, my mistake. So I have that data set as dataset.first. And I've kind of mentioned this earlier that whenever I'm creating this, I am not creating the CRUD user interface for creating data. I'm only focusing on creating this interface for annotating text. And so when I go to create data sets like this and all of this, I'm actually doing it from the Rails console. And so we have dataset.entities. It's an empty list, and I'm going to create a couple here, and we're going to have the title of year, and the color for this will be red. I'm going to change this. We'll have another title for make. Color for this will be blue, and title for the last one will be model. Color for this one will be green. I think this is all because I create these entities, and when we're looking at this text, like we have, this is a year, this is a model, this is a model, and this is a model. I think this This one is probably like year make model trim. So that's a trim. So let's also title trim color will be, oh my goodness, red, green, purple. I don't know. And okay, so we have our entities now, and this the colors will have to change, I'm sure, but they'll be perfectly good for what we're doing now. I'm going to go back into my dataset entity type, or I'm sorry, this type, and I'm going to say this has entities, and this will be a dataset entity type. Null is false. And we're going to generate that GraphQL type. So app GraphQL types dataset entity type.rb. We have that module. We have this class dataset entity type. It's a base object. And this is going to have an ID, which is a string. Oh, I'm sorry, integer. Null is false. And we're also going to have this title, which is a string, also not null. And we're going to have the color, which is string. Null is false as well here. Okay. So now if this is our query that we're using for this page here. I'm sorry, this one. I should be able to go in here and say when my entity types ID, title, and color. Okay, so this is all looking good. This will build this, that data will build this drop down like so. So I should be able, let's commit this, which I accidentally committed everything before, which was definitely a mistake, I think. But I'm going to add entity type. How about that? Perfectly good name. And I'll push this up so that the repository is more in sync with where I'm at right now. And I'm going to hop back over to my annotate index.js, which is this file. And I'm going to copy this in. So you know what? I'm going to type it in. Entities. And it has the ID, title, and color. Okay, so that is going to give us this data as well. And I'm going to follow the same pattern where I flatten this structure. So I have entities is dataset entities, like so. And then we'll use that to make our entities. And inside of here, I'm going to add a select. And I think this is probably okay. I'm just going to put it all into this one component. We could break it apart if we need to in the future. But right now, we're just going to say that we have entities.map. This gives us an entity. And we're just going to put out an option. The value will be the entity.id, I think. And we'll put entity.title inside of here. And the key will be entity.id. Okay, so this gives us this drop down. And we want to associate, this somehow. I'm reformatting while I think because I don't know what this looks like over here. They're associating this string. The string is only there to specify this span, I think. So that means that I should be able to say, I should be able to make, I'm sorry, I'm lost here. I should be able to make this an actual number. So 0 will not break anything. That's true, okay. And I should be able to, or let's just do null. What happens if I do null? Nothing bad, okay, all good. And actually I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna say entities, loading is true, then null, else it is entities 0 .id. So what happens here is that this would break if we actually created a new data set with no entities. But this is okay for now. This is actually going to work for us here because what we're going to do is be able to assign this tag ID. And so what we'll do down here is say that when we annotate this text, do we specify the tag as like an attribute? We do not. We say value is state.value, on change is this. So how do we change the tag? Is it all inside of this get span maybe? That's my guess. I don't know. Let's just try this. So we're going to say get span. It is a function that takes a span, and we're going to modify that span to include tag, which for us, I think is going to be our entities.find. I'm just going to make it a variable e.id equals state.tag. I'm realizing now this is probably how this works. And the color will be very similar .color. Let's just see what this looks like. So we make a selection here. We get an error. Didn't work. Title, okay. So what? Oh, let's also, oh my goodness. I think I can do this. I'm going to change this. I'm going to have value set value equal to use state as empty array. And I'm going to have const tag ID, which is tag ID is more like entity ID, is set entity ID. This is use state. And I'm going to make it null. Okay. And then I'm going to remove all of this. And where I referenced state.value before, I'm taking that away. I can now change this to just be set value to value, which means I can change all this to just set value. Okay, and I'm going to take all of this away just so I can make sure this is still working because we're making a lot of changes. Okay, so this is still working. Perfect. And what I should be able to do now is, this is fine. I can take that away and add it back later. I want to map this value to the entity ID. And on change, I'm going to break this apart like so. This is going to take the event, and we're going to say set entity ID to e.currentTarget.value. Okie dokie. So now value should not be null or empty string. Okay. Oh, maybe I should do that. Maybe I should change this to empty string. And I'm realizing now that this value probably needs to be to string. So many like bad things are going to happen now with terms of syntax. But this is working, so we can actually see our entity. Okay, so that all works. I'm going to introduce a blank option. Value is equal to empty string. That will be like a choose entity type. Okay. So this, now we have this empty, whatever. We have this, we have this select. We have to explicitly choose what we want. So that's all good. And then what I want to do here, man, I'm starting to lose my mind, I think. I'm going to have a const entity equals entity ID does not equal empty string. If it equals empty string, then we do empty object. And otherwise, we do entities.find entity ID equals parse int entity ID. Okay. So now what I should be able to do, so much going on here, is let's do like an h4 tag. We say entity.title. Okay. So now blank, put this in here. We have that year. And we're able to reference the entity directly. Okay, so we're building out this whole user interface so that we can now do on get span, which I remember now took in an argument and it returned back span with some modifications. So let's see if this all still works. It does. Okay, so I should be able to say tag is equal to entity.title, and we choose year, and we grab this 1972. Boom, we have this year. And I should also be able to say color is equal to entity.color. And now I choose year again, and I make that selection. Okay, it's the red. The make, we don't have. The model, we have this. Oh, and trim, we say 29 foot. Now, that is probably like the worst possible test case for this whole data set to train on. But it's real data, and we have to train the model against real data, and this is as close as we have. So, okay, trying to just kind of think about this. The colors are really bad. I'm going to try to change that just really simply here. So like trim will do like this color, okay? So I'm going to hop into the Rails console, and I think that was the last one. So we'll say dataset entity.last, and that was this one. And we'll say like update color equal to this color. And I'm going to remove the extra syntax. Okay, so that color has changed. The year, I think, was the first one. So dataset entity.first. That's the year. The red's not horrible, but I am just going to kind of change it to be something a little bit different. That's probably perfect. And we'll say update color to be this. Okay. And I know that I can say second to get that make. I'm really, wait, which one's make? Oh, we never did make. Let's grab that and say truck. Oh, wow. See, this is a good time to do this because otherwise it'd be really, really hard to actually know what these are. So I'm going to update the color of this one to be that. And data set third, which is that model, this green one. I'm just going to grab this and change it like so. Not the most beautiful tool you've ever seen, but it works. So we'll set our color to that. And now if we refresh and we run through this again, so we grab that year. Oh. They set entity.first color. Is that the color we did for year? Well, now I'm confused. I think it is because it's not. Oh, so much pain. Okay, grab that, and the color is not pure red, so I think that's matching. Okay, yeah, this is. I don't know. This is perfectly fine. I'm happy with that. I can read it. That's all that really matters. And so I'm going to look at this and say, add entity drop down. I'm trying to think through like include entity selection when annotating. And I'm going to push that. Okay, so we now have a working annotating tool. And what we want to look at real quick is I want to take this. I want to say I'm going to have a pre-formatted text area. I'm going to say JSON.stringify. I'm going to take that value null 2. I know this is, I actually don't know what the second parameter does, but this third one is saying I want to indent by 2 whenever it formats it. So if I grab year and I put it on here, we can actually see that our value where we're storing these entities, it is telling me that start and end offset, the text that is actually selected with the tag being year. Now, that tag, do I have another option? I want that to be the ID and not the freeform text. But I'm thinking I do not have that luxury. I don't even see documentation for this. I am just going to kind of cheat a little bit. That was text annotator. Does its props get span? Okay, I don't think. Let's see, props on change, handle split, splits, split. Let's take a look at this split, which existed where? Split. Oh, it was right here. Split up mark. Content. You know what? We're just going to be really happy with what we have here. I don't see a way to basically make this be an ID. I only see it as a way to make it be the string. And so I am going to just be happy with that. So we'll leave this inspection out so we can see that, because what we need to do, we're going to generate a new model. This is going to be a dataset text annotation. And this is going to have a dataset text that it belongs to. And it's also going to have a start, which is an integer, a end, which is an integer. End is such an unfortunate keyword in Ruby. Like, I love end. Don't get me wrong, but when you want to use it for like a column or an attribute, it adds all sorts of problems. But we'll live with that, even though it's going to make my life really hard. And I don't know. I want to say like start and end. Let's do like selection start, selection end. That way we even have this somewhat explicit. We'll include the tag, which is now going to be the dataset entity. It belongs to that. And then I think that's all we really need. Okay, so we're going to have to normalize this a little bit when we post it up. So create annotations, and this is going to have a null, false, null, false. All of this is good. So Rails DB migrate, just to make sure all of this didn't get typoed and we're actually referencing our tables correctly in that migration. We did, perfect, okay. So now I can hop into that text annotation, and I'm going to say that we validate the start presence is true, which is actually selection start and end, okay? And that's all we really grabbed inside of all of this. I don't think we need the text. I think we're okay with not including the text here. And so the thing that we want to do now is add a mutation so that when we make these changes and we're good and we submit it, that we post this up to actually save these. I'm going to commit, actually I'm going to reset and add DB and app models. Okay, so this is going to be all my annotations. I'm going to just say git commit add text annotations. And then this is that debugging. It'll probably get committed, but it'll be an accident. So we're ready to actually try to store this into our database, which I'm kind of stalling because I don't know exactly how this is going to look. But what I think we're going to do is we're going to go into our mutation type, and we can remove all of this. And we're going to have is it just called field? Yeah. So we're going to have a field for text add annotation. This is going to return back, probably, it really doesn't matter, but we'll return back our types, dataset text type, and it will not be null. And it's going to have an argument of ID, which is going to be an integer, and null or required is true. And for just to kind of get this where we can see this a little bit, we're going to have that text annotation or text add annotation. It's going to take in that ID as an argument, and we're going to say dataset text.find by ID, just so we can make sure the syntax is correct. So we'll have mutation. It's going to have the ID, which is an integer that's required. And we're going to have this called text add annotation. ID will be that ID. Okay, all good. And then we're going to just pull back that ID and text. Okay, and I'm going to grab the data set, ID, and title. I'm doing this so that I think what's going to happen is I'll click annotate, and I want it to redirect me back to the data set where I can do another one. And so this is just kind of getting me where I'll be able to do that. I also want to include these annotations. So let's add a app GraphQL types and a dataset text annotation type.rb. It's going to have that module. This will be a class dataset text annotation type, and it's a base object. And if I can type, we'll be good. Okay, cool. And this is going to have that ID. It's integer, null, or false field. And we have the selection start, which is an integer, also not null. and we have the selection int integer not null. And we're going to have the entity, which is the dataset entity type, not null. And I need to double check that annotation. I'm going to remove the prefix on this and make these class names go to like dataset text, and class name will be dataset entity up here. Okay, and what does my add text annotation? So I'm going to add that app models, and I'm going to amend my commit. Kind of a cheap way to say, you know what, I did that wrong, but I'm going to fix it before I actually commit. Okay, so we have this dataset text annotation. It has text entity, and I'm going to actually do both of those. Field entity or text is dataset text type. It's not null. Okay, and so if we go back to our dataset text type, we should be able to say that we have field annotations, and it's an array of dataset annotation type, not null. So much little things to do just so we can query this. And I need to double check my dataset text and dataset text. How many dataset text and edit anyways. And this needs to have many, so has many. Text class name of this will be dataset. I'm sorry, my goodness, Bail array. This is going to has many annotations. Class name is dataset text annotation. Whew, so long. Let's just see what we get. Do we have a bunch of errors? We do not. Okay, so do we have any annotations? It'll be an ID, and it'll be the selection start and the selection end. And we get back an empty array. So far, this looks good. Now, what I want to do is kind of cheat this a little bit. So I'm going to go back to my mutation type. And you know what I'm going to do real quick is add some of this. So like we'll include, like we're modifying that dataset text type. I'll include that annotation. I'm going to skip the mutation, and I'm going to add this dataset text annotation type, and I'm going to add my app models. Okay. App models. Okay, so here what we're doing is, and really, let's see, where am I? I want to do this right, and I have to redo this. So I'm gonna start by adding my app models, and that is my amend commit, because that all goes back to when I added annotations. I forgot to add the has many association to the text, and then I want to add app GraphQL types dataset star. Okay, and so this is my add annotation or dataset text annotation type. Okay, so now what we've done is we've added this annotations we're committing these individually so we can actually see what we did as we go along. And then for this mutation, okay, so now we're back to mutation. I want this to have and this is broken. Okay, that's back, cool. I want this, like when we make this selection, we grab year and we put this in here like this. I want my input type to include these three things: the start, the end, and the tag. And so I'm going to go in here and add an argument of annotations. It is going to be a annotation input like this. Required is true. Now we're telling it to be an array of annotations, and I'm going to create that at app GraphQL types annotation input.rb. Okay, this is going to be in the module. It's going to be a class of annotation input, and it's going to inherit from base input. I think that's right. Base input object. And now what we can do is we can define what kind of arguments this is going to have. And it's going to have that selection start, which is integer. It is required. We're going to have the argument for selection end, integer required true. And we're going to have the argument for the tag as a string required true. Okay? So what this will do, actually, you know what? I actually want to change this. I'm going to do entity ID and make this an integer. I am going to, my goal now, I want this to be modified to match the actual type. It'll be easier at this point. Okay, let me back up. It'll be easier at this point to understand what like year means and know that this ID matches whatever the ID of this is. Let's say 1. It'll be harder for me to get that string as an input and know what that meant. I'll have to go and look at the text. I'll have to go and find the appropriate data set, then find the entities, and then find the one by the name. So much easier to just do that here. So we're going to go with that. And what I'm going to do is grab these annotations. Annotations. So we have this array of annotations. And if we look at all this so far, we're missing this annotations variable. That's good. So this is getting us started. Annotations is the array type of annotation input. And it's required on both ends. And let me refresh. Okay, so this is good. And we need to include annotations. Is that annotations variable? Okay, cool. So now we're ready to start really rocking and rolling with this. So we're going to have annotations. It's an array, and it's going to have a selection start. And we're going to, let's just kind of recreate this one. We're going to have 17, okay? And the selection end is 21. And the entity ID will be 1. That one doesn't matter to me as much. And we run this. We don't see anything. That's perfectly fine. I'm also going to go, do I have access to my text? Entity. Oh, there we go. I want to see this. I want to see this be the ID and the title. Okay, so we're going to remove this, like will remove that below me, but this is going to allow us to see what this captures as. Okay, so we have these annotations. We're going to grab text is equal to this, and we're going to return text at the end, okay? And then what we're going to do is say annotations. I guess what we can do is this. We can say text.annotations dot, how do I do this? Do I want to actually say dot build? You can't build many, can you? Rails build. This only takes an individual record. Yes. So we'll need to do annotations dot each do annotation, and we're going to say build, and then this is going to take in that selection start is equal to annotation dot selection start. Cool. And we'll do the same thing here. We're going to replace start with end. Oh, it doesn't matter. I'll just start end. Okay. And we're going to have the dataset entity ID be that annotation.entity ID. Okay. So if I run this again, I expect it. Okay. Cannot return non-nullable field data text annotation ID. So that is, oh, because, so we'll just do ID is, we'll do like this with index. This is not what we'll do long term, but it'll get us by initially, so we can actually see this working. Oh, I guess I can't assign ID manually. Okay. Annotation type, and I'm going to make this nullable as true. Okay, just to get by. And we got an error. Schema is not configured for mutations. ID is declared but not used. I have done something horrible. Let me undo that. Something bad has happened, and I don't know what it is. Let me undo this, and oh, I have the syntax error right here. Okay. This should still break. I realize I should just comment that out. Can't return non-nullable field for entity. Okay, so let's do this. We'll say dataset, or let's say entity is equal to dataset entity entity.find. Okay, so this will allow us to just build this out more easily. Cannot write unknown attribute entity ID. What does that annotation look like? It has entity, okay. And this happened where? Sometimes the errors with GraphQL is just like ridiculous. I have no idea what this means. Can't write unknown attribute entity ID. Is that this input? Annotation input. We have entity type required true as argument. I don't think that's it. I think it is something to do with this. So let's undo dataset entity type, entity ID. Let's comment this out just to kind of see where we're at. Okay, so we have that passing through. Entity is not being initialized. Maybe I should do this. Maybe I should say entity is dataset entity dot find annotation dot entity ID, just to kind of do both. No, can't write unknown attribute entity ID. I do not understand what that is. And it doesn't tell me, it says it's in active record. My guess is that it's because I'm not saving these. Okay, so what I'm going to do is actually create these as they go through. Okay. And text must exist, text entity must exist. So why isn't this happy? We find the text, we go through annotations, we create them. Rails C, what's our text ID? 25. So text equals text.find25, text, by the way, data set. Okay, text.annotations, and they're empty. I just want to try this. I create one. It has the selection start of 17, selection end of 21, and the data set entity ID of 1. And oh man, this is not, this is start, and then we go back here, end, and then we go back over here, entity ID. Okay, so that creates one. And now if I say text.annotations, it's requerying it, which is probably fine, but it actually loaded correctly. And we grab that first one and we say .entity and we get null, nil. Why? Oh, I bet I forgot to do, no. Entity has a class name dataset entity. So why was that nil? Text equals this, text dot annotations entity first. So wait a minute. When I ran create like this, annotation A will be text dot annotations. I realize it's probably getting like really boring, very fast. I apologize. Dot first, A dot valid, A dot errors. Entity must exist, text must exist. So why is create on this association not working? Text has many annotations. Okay, class name is text, dataset text annotation. Okay, so it's working partially. I'm wondering if something feels odd. Something is definitely not right. What I'm going to do to just kind of correct this, which is not good, but I'm going to say dataset text annotation dot create, and I'm going to say dataset text ID is equal to text ID. So bad. I am fully aware this is not good, but I just want to see this working. And it still failed. Text must exist, entity must exist. So is it text ID and entity ID? Unknown attribute, text ID. I'll tell you what, let's do this. We'll say we'll actually just assign it as an object. And now we have an unknown attribute text ID. I think me renaming this has caused some type of weird error that, quite frankly, I don't know if I've ever encountered before. Okay, so I gotta like crack some knuckles here and see what am I missing here. So let's do this again. We're gonna go to Rails console. We're gonna grab some text, and it's text.first. It doesn't matter which one it is. And I have to do this again. Dataset text.first. Okay, so we have our text. Text.annotations. Annotations.create. Oh, you know what? Let's do a build. Let's say annotation is equal to this. Annotation.attributes. And that tells me that it needs the, okay, so it built it with the dataset text ID as 1. That worked. So the build is working. Okay. So now we have annotation dot entity ID is equal to 1 and doesn't know that. Okay, so we say dataset entity ID and it knows that one. Okay, so we look at the attributes again and that's assigned. Perfect. So we did that here and it didn't understand. And we don't need to do it here because I'm going to change this back to text.annotations.create. So what happens when we run this again? Text must exist, entity must exist. So let me try this. I'm going to say my A, I'm going to make it X, is build. Okay, I'm going to say x.save. And I'm going to actually throw in a bang just so we get an exception. And we're still getting the same error. Now, if I say x dot, I'll tell you what, let's look at this in here. Let's just do this again. Okay, so we try to commit, we get what I call it, X. X has the dataset text ID. It does not have an entity ID. X dot valid. It's not valid. X dot errors. Dot full messages, just so we can see this a little bit clearer. So these are the errors that we're getting. So the text must exist and the entity must exist. What is the problem? I wonder if I'm going to do this. I'm going to let the actual database tell me if this doesn't work. How does that sound? So we're going to have that entity ID, which is actually data set, as we learned. Dataset entity ID is equal to annotation.entity ID. Okay, and we're going to run this again, and can't return nullable field entity. So this is, I'm going to say x.reload, and try this again. Let's comment that out and just see what we're getting here. Okay, so we're getting these selections. They should have IDs because they're being populated. And I assume that this is erroring because the object entity, that exists, right? Dataset text annotation dot find by ID1, x equals that, x dot entity is nil. What does that need to be? So belongs to entity, class name is dataset entity. Oh my goodness, I think I'm totally missing this because I'm not telling it what the foreign key is. So foreign key is dataset entity ID, and this one is foreign key of dataset text ID. I think that's the problem. Let's just see. So x is going to be equal to dataset annotation or text annotation dot first x dot text x dot entity. Boom. Okay, that fixed the whole thing. Okay, because so the problem that I was having, if you've are still around after watching me fumble through this, is that I've aliased my accessor to this particular annotation. or for the text that belongs to this annotation. And the problem that I've had is that Rails thought that must be like text underscore ID. I needed to explicitly tell it that no, it's dataset text ID. So now I should be able to go back to this being just entity ID. Nope. Let's try to do it this way. Boom. Okay, so this is working now. And the thing that we can tell is first, we can remove this variable assignment. We're going to change build to create with bang. And I'm also going to go at the top and say text.annotations.destroy all. So when we actually run this, when we add an annotation, we're really replacing all of them. And so now if I run this, we should get a single annotation and it matches this, and we copy this and we do it again, and I'm going to move it to like 24 and make this 28 or something and 2, and you can see now we're actually building, we're building this out as it should be. Okay, so all of that, now we're ready to, this is our data structure that we need to build, and I want to preview it here as I'm making changes. So what I'm first going to do is say, let's commit app GraphQL, and I'm going to do it the way I've been kind of doing it before, and I'm going to add my app models, and I'm going to amend this because it's all in there, and I'm going to add that app GraphQL and say that we're going to add annotation create mutation. And I'm going to make that add annotation create mutation. Okay. And now we're back to going to our JavaScript layer. So we'll have annotate index.js. And we're going to change this to something like build variables, or like GraphQL input. And we're going to do that from our value and our entities, which actually what I'll do instead is, yeah, we'll just do it like this for now. So I'm going to create a function called build GraphQL input, and that takes our, actually we have both of those variables to us right now. And so I'm going to delete that here. And I'm going to have this, what's the problem? Oh, I've closed this too early. Okay. So I'm going to return back an array. And this is going to be, it's going to look like this. We're going to have the annotations object. Well, first we'll have ID, which is our ID. And we don't need that. And actually this is an object. Okay, so we have our ID here, and then we're going to have these annotations, and this is going to come from value, and we're going to map over each of these, and we'll call it an annotation, and I'm going to turn it into an object here, and we need that selection start comes from annotation.start, selection end comes from annotation.end, and I need that entity ID, and this comes from entities.find, and we're going to pass in that entity.title equals annotation.tag, I think, .id. So this did not work. So something is not happy. Oh, I need another closing brace. Okay. So here, as you can see, we're building out this like so, and I should be able to say that like I have a year and it exists here, and we see entity ID 1, selection start, selection end, make, which we don't have. We have the model here, and I assume the trim is this 29 foot. I really don't know for sure. And we have a model over here, and we have a model over here, and we can see how these annotations are getting built, and we know that this is going to directly go into our text add mutation here. Everything is just going to work when we add this. So I'm going to remove some of this. In fact, I'm going to remove all of this because we don't need these annotations. We only want this amount of data like so. So I'm going to come over and add a use mutation. And I'm going to create another GraphQL const query here that is add annotations. And I should probably pluralize that over there, but this is perfectly fine for here. And I'm going to indent this like so. And now I'll be able to say that I have a const add annotations. And this will be equal to use mutation. And we're going to take in our add annotation mutation query. And I'm going to add a button. So we'll replace this with a button. And the class name for this will be button is primary. And we're going to title this as like save annotations. Okay. And we'll add an on click to this and say on click, we want to save annotations. And when we do that, we're going to have this function here, save annotations. And it's going to take in that event. We want to prevent default. So we don't, the button won't do anything, which I guess actually I can fix that by just saying that this has a type of button. That does the same thing. And now what we'll do is we're going to call our add annotations, and we're going to pass in the variables as build GraphQL input, like so. And we'll say .then, and when we're successful or whatever, we'll log it. So we can just kind of see what this looks like. So I'm going to add that year, and I'm going to grab that model, and oops, make that year again. And I'm just going to save it so we can just see what this looks like. We got an error. Variable ID is of type int, provided invalid value. So let's just take a look and see what we tried to post. So our request, and we can see the variables for our ID was not, okay, so we can fix that by saying make this parse int ID. Very cool. And so now if I do this again, we'll have that year and we'll do this model, and this will give us that. And we actually get back a successful response, and we don't see anything, but we should be able to query that now. So query data set or text by ID of 20 or 1, I think is what we have over here. And we want to see the ID, the text, and our annotations, and that'll be ID, start, end, and the entity on this will be ID and title. And as you can see, it worked. We were able to, from our interface over here, push these annotations up to make this GraphQL object. And now we're getting back our data set. What I want to do is grab navigate from my reach router. And when I'm successful, I want to navigate back to datasets, dataset.id. And I'm making some assumptions that these things are not null. Some of this app is kind of missing a little bit here, but it'll be really close. So this time I'm going to do this one for real. I'm going to put it the year, the model, and this one as well. And then I'm going to put in the trim as being 29 foot and save these annotations. And you can see that when I save that, it redirects me back here. So this is all good. So let's commit this as actually save annotations with GraphQL. And one thing I'm noticing is I would like to modify this text and have it include like is annotated. So I'm going to generate a migration. It's a add annotated et to datasets dataset text, and we'll say annotated et is a date time. I think I typoed that, so we need to double check. Add annotated et. Add annotated. Okay. Nope, I think that's right. And it'll be null is true, so that's good. So Rails DB migrate. And this is going to add that column to our table. And now we can hop over to our mutation, and we're going to save that. So we'll say text.annotated at equals time.now. So now we're going to actually have that time associated with this, and then we'll hop into our dataset text, and we'll be able to actually include our dataset text type, and we're going to include that annotated at, it's a string, null is true. Okay, so now what we can do is when we query our dataset one text and we include that ID and text, and I'm going to put the annotated above it, and I need to annotate it at, we can see that some of these are null, and that's because we have to redo it. But I'll do it real quick. We'll just go into this one here, and well, that one's more complicated. I'm going to do this one. This will be perfect. So we'll grab that year. I'm just going to save this, and if we run this again, we don't actually see that. That didn't work. Mutation type. Oh, we didn't save so we'll say .update annotated at is time.now. Not the best way to do this. I should probably put all this in a transaction. And in fact, we will do that. We'll just say active record, or actually we'll just do dataset text.transaction. And now we only save if everything saves. And this exception's not the prettiest, but it'll at least allow us to have something that somewhat warns us. So now if I run this, I should be able to, it's unfortunate that I have to do this again, but I'm not going to do them all. If we run this again, it actually moved it to the bottom because it's updated, but we can actually see it's annotated time zone. So cool. We can just include all of this and say that add annotated at to text. Okay, so now I'm going to push this because that's getting complete. And we're at a point now where when we annotate a data set, we're ready to train a Spacy model. And the way we would do that, I think, for what I'm thinking is at least, is that I would post this ID. The query would look almost identical to this. And I would say I want to grab the annotations for this, and I need the selection start and the selection end, and I need that entity ID and title. And so what this will do is whenever we find like this one that's been annotated, when we train Spacy, it'll look at this text and it'll apply these annotations with this particular entity type. And I haven't done this in a really long time. There is a way to train an entity recognizer maybe. And so this is wanting to load a model. We have prediction, we have set annotations, modify a batch of documents using pre-computed scores. We don't want that. We want to train, let's see if there's a usage on how to train a model. So training models, we're going to train for NER, and this might be everything we need to do. So we have Spacy, we have our training data. This is very similar to the data type that we've created. We have that text, and then we also have our entities with their start and end. And we can ignore this plaque thing. And we load a model with Spacy, okay? Otherwise, we create a blank model. It'll be interesting to know if we do better with training with the blank model or a new model. And we're going to add this pipe for NER, which will probably already exist in our base model. Otherwise, we get that pipe. Okay, so this is all probably something we'll just copy this whole thing. And then we're going through that train data, which is, I don't actually know Python well enough to know, or at least remember what the underscores here, but is this a hash? No, it's an array. So it must be giving us that annotations. And then we're able to get, that's a tuple. So we're getting, is it a tuple? It's a hash. Oh, okay. So we're adding all of these entity types here. It's adding all of these as labels for this model. Okay. And then what happens? We include all the other pipes. I don't know what that is. Oh, so we're keeping these, but we're ignoring others? I don't know. Well, we're probably going to end up copying like this whole script. And what I'm thinking as well is this has already been like 2 hours and 15 minutes. I don't know if anyone is still watching. It says current viewers 1. That's probably me, is my guess. I think I'm going to take a break and we'll pick this back up later, because right now we have a data set, or at least an application for the most part, that allows us to train or at least classify or label these documents. And the next step will be to create a Python script that takes in this ID, runs this GraphQL query, and then takes this data to run basically this Python script right here. I mean, that's all we're going to do. Pretty straightforward. So I think I'm going to call it quits and take a break. I'm tired of talking. My throat hurts so bad. And I appreciate everyone that stuck around, and I hope you enjoyed it. And I will see you in the next episode where we actually write the Python to this.